the NHL draft is right around the corner, and the Carolina Hurricanes have made some pretty bad draft picks over the years. In this episode, we'll be looking at the worst Carolina Hurricanes draft picks of all time in this episode of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, Caniacs. I'm your host, Jared Ellis, and you're listening to Locked On Hurricanes on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Hurricanes your first listen of the day. And this episode is brought to you by the lovely folks over at Gametime. Download Gametime, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like we said, we will be talking about the worst Carolina Hurricanes draft picks of all time. In the previous episode, we went over the best Carolina Hurricanes draft picks. So go listen to that episode after you are done with this one. That one was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun talk and reminiscing about some good memories with those guys. And in this episode, we're going to be doing the opposite, looking at worst Carolina Hurricanes draft picks of all time. And this was one, we were talking before we recorded, trying to figure out the line of worst and just kind of in the ether of draft picks. And that was something we kind of had to do, just figuring out that line. So Andrew, let's start off. Do you have any dishonorable mentions here for the worst Hurricanes draft picks before we start diving in?
Yeah, I've got a few. I've got Ryan Murphy, their first round pick, I think it like 11th or 12th overall in 2011. Undersized defenseman. Hope was that he could kind of become a really good offensive defenseman. Played a little bit, never really panned out. Zach Boychuk, you all know the story there. First round pick, and I believe 2008, the Hurricanes could have had, I think Erik Karlsson, the defenseman, was taking the pick right after him. Had several chances to make it in the NHL with the Hurricanes, with a couple other teams. Never did, never came close to panning out into the goal-scoring winger he was supposed to be. More well-known for following literally anyone and everyone on Twitter than anything he did as an NHL player. And the other one is a recent one from the 2017 draft, defenseman Luke Martin in the second round. You'd like to get something out of a second-round pick. They didn't. He's never played in the NHL. I don't think he's under contract with the Hurricanes or any other NHL organization at the moment, so that one was kind of a flop as well.
Yeah, I really agree with all this. And I saw your list before this, and I'm really excited to hear about all of your names because you really went into depth with these guys, and I'm really, really excited to pick your brain on all of these. And starting out with my worst was someone that you just talked about, Zach Boychuk. He's just that getting picked right before Erik Karlsson. That just stings, and it's not even. Obviously, there's that, but also the fact that you're more well known for following people on Twitter than anything you ever did on the ice. That's just like, oh, come on, man. And oh god, that one stings. That one really, really stings. And there's going to be a couple of those guys, that we talk about today. Actually, you already mentioned one of them, or actually, I'll mention one of them in a bit. Of when you look at these guys, where they were drafted, and then some names that were drafted afterwards, that definitely stings for sure. And that's something that's regardless of the sport. You see it in football. You see it in basketball, baseball. You see it across sports. And, I try not to put too much stock in that because, just at the time, you know, did Eric Carlson was going to be, future Norris Trophy winner, you know? Uh, so try not to put too much stock into that, but it's definitely something that, you're gonna take into consideration regardless. But yeah, Zach Boychuk, yikes. And also, again, the fact that he had multiple chances to crack it in the NHL and still couldn't. It's not like one of those things. We're not going to talk about him here, but like Alex Nokovic, yeah, he couldn't crack it at first, but then he got it. It wasn't like that. Or a guy, that we talked about in uh in the best, Martin Necas, he did have his time in Charlotte when they were the NHL affiliates, or AHL affiliate, excuse me, for the Hurricanes. And, he, was there, and then, he finally was able to crack it. I think on his first shot, as well, I believe, but I'm not memory's a little foggy there. But yeah, again, just multiple chances to crack it and just could never do it. But heading into your next one, Andrew, who you got? Or
So
into your number 5, excuse me.
we're starting at number 5. I'm starting with the 2016 draft overall, just because that's a draft the Hurricanes went into with 2 first rounders. A lot of hope. Oh, are they going to get 2 really good players that are going to be part of their future? Are they going to package them for NHL help? Are they going to move up? They end up staying at both spots and didn't have anything to show for 2 first rounders, which is impressive that they got to where they were by 2019, considering it hadn't been that long since they totally whiffed on having, 2 first rounders, something you really need to take advantage of. They took Jake Bean and Julian Gauthier, the hope of the, Bean developing into a really good puck moving offensive defenseman, power play quarterback. Gauthier developing into a goal scoring power forward. Gauthier never did much of anything with the Hurricanes, traded to the Rangers. I believe he's part of the Ottawa Senators system now. Bean played some in the 2021 season, showed some flashes. They end up trading him to Columbus, where I don't really think he's done anything. So, yeah, I mean, that's a disappointment to not get anything out of a draft where you have 2 first rounders. You look at Bean in particular, too, if they wanted a defenseman, 2 guys that were taken after him who have developed into really, really good top pairing defensemen were Charlie McAvoy with the Bruins and Jacob Chikrin with the Coyotes. So, those are guys that in hindsight might have been better to go with. But yeah, I mean, again, just with not getting anything out of a draft where you had 2 first round picks is definitely disappointing.
Yeah, it's Cleveland Browns esque draft there. And, like you said, Jake being a couple moments, here and there, but Julian Gauthier, he in Hurricanes lore, he's known more for his Charlotte Checkers tenure of having Raining Men as his goal song, and that's
I forgot
not
about that.
necessarily the best thing. They did have that great tribute video to him though. Whenever he got traded to the Rangers, that was a great video with Raining Men on the piano. That was great. But yeah, he was, he had a couple moments in the NHL. Yeah, but yeah, it just wasn't there for him as well. My next one, is a guy that I think may ruffle some feathers, and that is Hayden Fleury. He was obviously a fan favorite player, and he was not a truly, he wasn't bad, and he wasn't a bust. But you look at where he was drafted, it's just one of those things. Yeah, he's just did not live up to his draft stock or draft pick or draft spot. Excuse me. He was Ron Francis's first draft pick. He was a guy that the Hurricanes really, really tried with him, and he did have flashes. We all had seen them before, but just one that did not live up to his potential with the Hurricanes. You look at who was drafted after him: William Nylander, Ellers, Vrana, Larkin, and who else was it? You had mentioned one other name before
David
we.
Pasternak.
Yeah, David Pasternak. Oh yeah, I wrote him off to the side. Excuse me. Rather than with all the other names. But yeah, you look at who all else was drafted after him, and it's just like, what the heck, man? And the fact that he had multiple chances at the to crack the NHL roster full time, and never. He was kind of one that went back and forth some, and it just wasn't there for him. And then you look, now he's bounced around the league, going from Anaheim to Seattle, which you figured they were going to take him into the expansion draft because of Ron Francis. And then now Tampa, just bouncing around and not finding that solid home. And it really sucks for him because he's a great guy. We've both met and talked with him. He's a great guy, beautiful family, and he had the potential was there, but at this point, I just kind of look back on him and I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a bit of a bust.
Yeah, definitely not what the Hurricanes were hoping for when they took him there. Had some flashes. You had that bubble series against Boston in 2020 where he was really good. But yeah,
Yeah,
7th overall pick, third pairing guy at best that he's been in
yeah,
the league just didn't really work out.
yeah, and it sucks. And again, we like Hayden Fleury. He's a fan favorite player for a
Oh,
reason.
he's an
Like,
awesome
people
guy.
like him.
Yeah.
Yeah, like people like him, and yeah he's a good kind of guy that can bounce back and forth. I think that's kind of where he's at. He can be your seventh defenseman essentially, but you actually kind of funny being seventh overall. But you drafted a defenseman, seventh overall. You're looking for a potential franchise defenseman there, like we talked about with Jacob Slavin. You that's what you're looking for there, and it was not that at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, Andrew, who was your next one?
So I've got a bunch of guys who the Hurricanes drafted in the first round that either never played or barely played. So this is actually their first draft pick as the Hurricanes, first round in 2020, or no, excuse me, in 1997. They took Nikos Stelios, a Greek American defenseman. Believe he was the first Greek American player in NHL history. So that was cool. What was not cool was he was a first round pick for the Hurricanes, and he played a grand total of 2 NHL games. Yeah, don't know really what else you can say there. You take your first round pick, especially your first round pick in team history, and you effectively get nothing out of them.
Yeah,
that's a bust. That's a straight up bust.
Yeah, that is a textbook definition of a bust, and it kind of sucks that that was your first overall pick. But you've seen that in other sports too. Of first pick ever doesn't actually doesn't work out. Look at David Carr with the Houston Texans. So it sucks that it happened like that, but it did. Your first pick in 2 games. Yeah, that is it's not great. It's not great. Next up for me, guy that you mentioned in your honorable mentions, and that is Ryan Murphy. And he was a guy. He played 151 games for the Hurricanes. He scored 6 goals. He had 31 points, and the most games he ever played in a season was 48 in the 2013-2014 season. And after that, he never played more than 40 games for the Hurricanes again. So, oh God, what was he drafted at? Gosh,
It was like
because
12th overall in
yeah,
2011.
okay, yeah, I knew it was like high teens or somewhere in there. But yeah, you look at where he was drafted, kind of a lot of what I said about Hayden Fleury. You look at that and where he was drafted, you're wanting much more out of him from that. And you know, yeah, it's just kind of frustrating. Yeah, definitely bust, in my opinion. And you never like to see a guy be a bust, yeah, because that's their career. Uh, but yeah, 151 games and 6 goals, 31 points. Yeah, it's not great. It's not
Yeah.
great. But next up for you, Andrew, unless you have more thoughts on Ryan Murphy.
No, I kind of went over it in my honorable mention, and you hit it pretty well. Just a disappointment. Kind of a, at the time. I mean, undersized defensemen have done better and better and better. At the time, it was kind of thought of a risk, and just kind of an
Yeah.
experiment gone wrong in that regard. I think. I've got another. So the first few years that they were a team, the Hurricanes did not have much success drafting first round players. Jeff Harema, an American born winger, I believe. Let me look at this again. Or no, Canadian born winger, excuse me. 11th overall pick, first round pick in the 1998 draft, played a grand total of 32 NHL games, 4 goals, 6 points. Again, I just want to reiterate it. When you don't really get any kind of impact at all out of a first round pick, especially a borderline top 10 pick. And you look at some of the guys that were drafted at, like Alex Tanguay was drafted right after him in 1998. He's a guy who ended up having a really nice career. So, that's just another flop for the Hurricanes. And impressive that they had as much early success as they did, like with getting to the Cup final in 2002, with the number of busts that they had in the draft early on in their history.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. I'll give more of my thoughts on that right after this quick break, folks. Now, folks, buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you with killer deals on last minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Heck, summer concert season is right around the corner, folks. So if you got someone coming, whether it be to Raleigh, to Charlotte, or somewhere near you, Game Time is the place to go. So forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. So if you end up getting the day off at the last second, Game Time has you covered. So get exclusive deals for tickets on football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, music, and more. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You're never going to get surprised by like a polling your way or anything like that. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're all set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email because that is never fun. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Now, piggybacking off of what you just said about the Hurricanes' early success, and yeah, it's crazy to think about of the success they were able to have early on with their poor drafting, frankly, and the fact that they're able to make it to that Stanley Cup final. And I think that honestly ends up just being a testament to their veterans there at the time. You have Rod Brind'amour, came in 2000. You had Glenn Wesley, he was carryover from Hartford. Braun Francis, who came back, and I think those guys were key pieces in there. Arturas Urbe as well. I think those were kind of key pieces in their early success there, and not necessarily them drafting because they did not draft well in those early days by any means.
Yeah, and then you look at Rod, like you said, Rod Francis coming over as a free agent, and then obviously the Rod Brind'amour trade as well.
Yeah, it is big places. Yeah, big pieces there. Excuse me. And yeah, they're almost built more on their veterans rather than their young guys at that point in time. Whereas now you look at a lot of the guys on the roster, who a lot of them we talked about in the best: Sebastian Aho, Andrei Svechnikov, Jacob Slavin. You also have Brett Pesci. You have Martin Necas. A lot of the guys that they have now are guys that they drafted and developed. Obviously, they have their veteran trades and free agent signings, of course. But yeah, it's kind of different now. But they've really developed their talent in house and really been a homegrown team for their core as of late. Next up for me, this is gonna be another one that folks may uh, question a little bit, and that is Noah Hannafin. And in my opinion, just did not live up to his potential. Over his tenure with the Hurricanes, he was, and I don't put a lot of stock into the plus minus stat, just because it's very finicky and doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. But you look at his plus minus from his tenure with the Hurricanes, it's not good. It is a minus 53, and it's not good. Especially if it's a little plus or a little minus, I'm like, okay, whatever. But when it gets like really up there or really down low, that's when I'm like, okay, yeah, that's not great. But he is a guy that again just did not live up to his potential for the Hurricanes. And one thing, we were talking about before recording was, in my opinion, the biggest thing for him was being a part of that Dougie Hamilton trade. And bringing Dougie in, and that was almost like the best thing he did was just being a piece in that Dougie trade. But again, just a guy that we've talked about a lot in this episode, just guys that did not live up to their potential. And yeah, Noah Hannafin for me, he did not live up to his potential at all.
So I really don't agree with his placement here. I agree with him not living up to his
I don't really
potential.
have them numbered. They're just kind of like in a list.
Well, I just don't really agree with him as a worst draft pick. Just because I mean, the one thing you can look at is some of the guys drafted shortly after him, like Zach Werenski, Timo Meier, Mikko Rantanen, who have been really good, who could have been better, but he was drafted as a potential top pairing number one defenseman. Still ended up being a top four defenseman with the Hurricanes and with Calgary. Like we said, ended up getting them Dougie Hamilton. So I don't know. He's just not a guy I would have in here. But I do get what you're saying, certainly, with not living up to his full potential and the hope that the Hurricanes obviously had for him when they drafted him.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at there. And like I said, my guys, they're not, in like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just kind of more of a list, just kind of how I wrote them down. And yeah, he's just, again, just for me, just did not live up to the potential that they're having for him. And yeah, we'll see how things continue to pan out for him in his career. Maybe he can, eventually, become that top pairing defenseman. But we'll just have to wait and see. But for your next one, Andrew, who you got?
I've got Igor Nyazev, a Russian defenseman that the Hurricanes Russian defenseman. They drafted at number 15 overall in the 2001 NHL draft. Again, one of those early 10-year busts. Did not play an NHL game. Again, top 15 pick. You literally get nothing out of him. Not much else to say there. Not great. You look at some of the other guys the Hurricanes could have drafted instead after him. RJ Umberger had a decent career as kind of a middle six forward. Actually, funny enough, could have had Tim Gleason, who they ended up eventually having anyway, and ended up being one of the better defensemen in Hurricanes history. But yeah, you draft a guy and he ends up. I'm actually not sure. Okay, so he played 2 seasons in the AHL and then just ended up going back to Russia and never playing in the NHL. So again, just another total swing and miss in the first round. We talked about value with some of the best draft picks. Some of these guys that they took in the late 90s, early 2000s that they didn't get anything out of, the absolute opposite of value for the Hurricanes.
Yeah, I 100% agree there. And yeah, just these early drafts were not good for them. And, especially like you just look at these guys, like Igor there, like I just, you don't even play a game for the team. And that is absolutely wild. Um, I absolutely do not have him on my worst list now, especially now that he is a Carolina Hurricane. But one that had things panned out differently in free agency very well could have ended up on this list, and that is Frederick Anderson, because you remember they drafted him back in 2010, correct?
Yeah.
Is it 2010? And then they obviously did training camp, but he did not sign with them. And yeah, he went back, played where he was playing, and then got drafted again by Anaheim. And that was one that had things, had he not eventually came here to the Hurricanes and continued to have the career again that he was having of being a really good goalie. It could have been one for him, just being a guy that you couldn't get under contract.
Uh, yeah, I mean, the only thing, like, he was a seventh round pick. I mean,
Yeah, I
how,
mean,
how
it's not
many
that
times do you have a seventh round pick not CD8? And it's like he didn't
it's more the
sign with
value
them
thing
because
that
he
we're
had
talking about.
Cam Ward blocking him essentially from getting a shot. And then he ended up having a really good career with Anaheim and Toronto before eventually coming to the Hurricanes. So that would be my only thought there. Even if that, he ends up, like, say after he leaves Toronto, he signs with Buffalo and never comes to the Hurricanes. I still wouldn't have had him on there just because of his draft slot and the way that things played out.
Yeah, it is more like the value aspect of it, of you get that really late round pick that turns into that really really good player. And like you said, you obviously had Cam Ward there at the time, but yeah, it's just one of those things. Yeah, had they not been able to get him, and it's just one of those things you kind of look back like, oh, you drafted him, but he never played for you, and now and he didn't sign with you, and now look at what he's done. He got drafted again, and it's just like one of those things that it's like, oh man, that really could have been a stinger. It could have been really one that really stung. Had the Hurricanes never been able to get him under contract, now they do, and he's played really well for him, and we'll see how things continue. But your number one is one that I am really excited to talk about, because I see the note you have written by him. And I'm really excited to hear about this. And we will hear about it right after this quick break, folks. Now, folks, bird dogs are designed to make you look good. Bird dogs are stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit better than regular shorts that are made with stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so you get a slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dogs uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. I've said before, I can attest to that. Wearing them in downtown Charlotte when me and my friend went up there for a show and were walking around out there. And yeah, they were extremely comfortable. I didn't get all nasty and sweaty. So right now you can go over to birddogs.com/locked on NHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/locked on NHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you. They are extremely, extremely comfortable, guys. I love mine, and you are going to love yours. So now getting back into Andrew's worst draft pick. This is one I am super excited to hear you talk about, Andrew. So take it away.
Well, it's just a very bizarre situation because is in 2009 coming
Mm-hmm.
off their
Yeah.
run to the Eastern Conference Final. They had the 27th overall pick. They took Philippe Paradis, a Canadian center. And the thing that's just weird is obviously he was a bust. He never played in the NHL, but it's like they figured out that they didn't want him or something went wrong very quickly, which is the weirdest part for me because like they had just taken him in the first round, but they ended up trading him like
Mm-hmm.
into the next season, which you just almost never see with a guy you just took in the first round. But I'll give them credit. They traded him to Toronto for a failed draft pick from the Leafs, Yuri Talusti, who ended up having a really nice run of production and success with the Hurricanes. Became a nice goal scoring top six winger, played in the bottom six some, ended up playing some with Eric Stahl, had obviously that magical season on the top line with Eric Stahl and Alexander Semin in the shortened 2013 season when he scored at like a 40 goal pace. So you got to give him credit for this one because they turned the draft bus into a guy who is actually a really productive player for them for several years. But it's just the weirdness of it for me. You take a guy in the first round and then like immediately into the next season you trade him. It's like, okay, so like what were you thinking in the first place? Like how did it go so wrong so quickly? That's why it's number one for me and just a really weird situation. You look at that draft, nobody really after him in the first round that I would have taken. And then the guy obviously in the second round, very early in the second round, so just a few picks later, is Ryan O'Reilly with the Colorado Avalanche, who's been a very productive top six center over his NHL career. But, once you get into that late first, early second round, it's hard to project guys. But yeah, definitely just another whiff and a really weird situation with that one.
Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder, with that, did they end up seeing something that they missed in his scouting reports? Was there something they missed? Was there something that went on behind closed doors, or what that just made them be like, "Oh, okay, no, we're moving on." It's obviously something you and I, and the folks listening, we're not gonna know this probably ever, as far as to why they had such a quick turnaround for him, and why they're just like, oh nope, year later we're trading our first round pick who didn't even play for us. So it's very weird. I agree. It is extremely weird as to
Bizarre.
why they moved on so quick.
Yeah.
And yeah, it definitely
But
be
it worked
one
out. I
that
mean, it
you
worked out for him in the end.
yeah,
That's
of
the
course.
funniest part is you turned him into Yuri Talusti. Like if you could I mean, obviously at that point Yuri Talusti had already been drafted like a year or two earlier, but if you could just go back and then say you drafted Yuri Talusti in that spot,
Mhm.
then it's fine. But it's just the whole weirdness of it for me is what really puts it over the top.
Yeah, it's really weird, and be one of those you'd love to just, be a fly on the wall, in those meetings as to why they drafted him, and, meetings about him, is after they've drafted him, meetings, leading up to the trade. It's just one of those, like, what the heck, and that's, putting it politely and keeping it PG here. What the heck is going on? Uh, but yeah, there's, like we said, a lot throughout this episode. A lot of the guys drafted in the early days, for the Hurricanes, late 90s, early 2000s. A lot of those guys did not pan out for the Hurricanes. So yeah, a whole host of those guys could have been on this list. Had a nice variety of more recent guys. Guys that we had some debate on. As we've been going on, Noah Hannafin, thinking about it, maybe he's a guy that I should just kind of left in the ether of draft picks, not in the best, not in the worst, but
That's where he is for me. Yeah.
kind of in the ether of just
Yeah.
there.
Well, it's like To me, if you draft a guy and he doesn't fulfill quite where you thought he was going to be in terms of like a top, center, top defenseman, but he's still a useful NHL player.
Hmm.
I don't really know that qualifies as a bust for me, if that makes sense. Just because like it's drafting is really hard,
No,
and
yeah,
making the
especially in
NHL
hockey.
as a draft pick and being a productive NHL player is really really hard. So like I looked at this at the NHL. I've looked at this with the NFL with certain guys. Like again, I'm not if a guy isn't quite the highest level that you projected him to be, but he still becomes a useful player.
Yeah,
I have a hard time calling that guy a bust. I get everything you were saying with Hannafin about him disappointing regarding his potential, but he's still. I mean, like, and it's not even him. Like, oh, he just barely stuck in as a third pairing guy. Like, he's still a top four, second pairing
true.
defenseman. I think both for the Hurricanes and for Calgary. So that's where my thought process comes in with that sort of thing.
Yeah, kind of not necessarily like Hayden Fleury of a guy that's
Yeah.
you drafting numbers 7 overall, and is barely a third pairing defenseman, now. And yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, like I said, maybe I should have left him uh, in the ether pool of guys. Um, but yeah, just like I said, for me, just did not live up to his potential. But like you said, did is still a useful NHL player, which is more than we can say about a lot of these other guys here, to say the least. But yeah, at the end of the day, we hate that these it didn't pan out for these guys. You never want to see that. Everyone wants to be the next Wayne Gretzky, but not everyone can be the next Wayne Gretzky. But those are our worst draft picks, and some ether guys as well. But let us know what y'all's worst Hurricanes draft picks are. Tweet at us on Twitter at LO_Hurricanes, myself on Twitter at Jared Ellis _96, Andrew on Twitter at ASchnitt53. And don't forget, leave a comment over on our YouTube. We finally hit the 500 subscriber mark over there. So thank you all for that. And as always, let's go Canes.